Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be our next video on understanding fertilizers and specifically how to go through and grow plants effectively. Let's get started on our next video. So if we go down the aisle at one of the hardware stores, you're going to see all these different brands and bags and numbers on all these different types of fertilizers. And when you go through and plant a garden or maybe fertilize your lawn, it's going to be really difficult to go through and select the correct fertilizer without going through and understanding what these numbers mean and how the plants go through and feed. Now, when you go through and start off and you really want to effectively go through and begin growing a really, really nice garden or lawn, you're going to want to go through and do a soil sample test. And within that soil sample test, you're going to test for three things: nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Now, if we look on the front of a fertilizer bag, we're going to see these three numbers here. And these three numbers represent these three nutrients that are really, really key for these plants. So the first number is going to represent the nitrogen, the percent of nitrogen in that bag. The second is going to represent the phosphorus. And then the third is going to represent the potassium. And each of these three individual elements here is going to have a very key and important purpose when the plant is going through and growing. Now, as a general rule of thumb, these are what these three nutrients or elements are going to do. However, when we go through and talk about photosynthesis and talk about plants in more detail, this is not going to give us the complete picture. So remember, this is a general rule of thumb. So nitrogen is going to stimulate leaf and stem growth here. So it's going to allow the plant to really grow upward and allow those leaf and stems to grow very hardy. Now, phosphorus is going to encourage flowering, rooting, and fruiting. So it's going to encourage, fruiting bodies and allow the roots to go through and expand in that soil. And then lastly, the potassium is going to increase the hardiness of drought and disease. So if there was a really hot summer or there was some sort of disease going around, this potassium is really going to help fight off whatever it is that's trying to go through and prevent the plant from growing healthily. Now, the reason that we go through and test the soil is because each one of these nutrients is going to go through and interact differently with the plant. If we look at nitrogen, nitrogen is going to get uptaken by the plant much more quickly than the potassium and the phosphorus. So as a result, if you continue to fertilize your lawn or put fertilizer in your garden, what's going to happen over time is you're going to accumulate all of this potassium and phosphorus. Now, too much fertilizer can be very bad for the plant, and you can actually burn your plants and kill the plants over time. So the ratio of this potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen is really key, and it's also important to understand that they have different solubilities and the plants go through and uptake them differently and at different rates. So if we look at these numbers in a little bit more detail, well, we have to go through and look at it this way. Let's say we have a 50-pound bag with the numbers 19, 4, 10. Well, this is going to represent the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that fertilizer bag. So if we look at this, a 50-pound bag, well, 19% of that 50-pound bag, there's going to be 9.5 pounds of nitrogen in there. 4% is phosphorus, so there's 2 pounds of phosphorus in there. And if we look at this potassium, 10% of that 50 is going to be 5 pounds of potassium. So depending upon our soil sample, we can go through and distribute the correct amount of fertilizer to those plants in that area. Now, it's also important to note that there are going to be two different types of fertilizers. We have organic fertilizers, and then we have synthetic fertilizers. And they're different, and they're going to have different purposes, and where you can purchase them are also going to be different. Now, organic fertilizers are going to be things like manure, and they're coming from broken down animal or plant material. So they were once living organisms that are now going through and decomposing and providing nutrients to that ecosystem. Now, they're going to feed plants slowly. So they're slowly releasing this nitrogen, this potassium, and this phosphorus. And as a result, the application of organic fertilizers can be much less. You have to put the organic fertilizer down much less often in order to get the plants to grow effectively. Now, synthetic fertilizer is going to be different. Synthetic fertilizer is going to be derived from minerals, gases, and waste products. It's generally gone through and developed in a lab and then produced in a factory. Now, they are going to feed the plants very rapidly. And as a result, they're going to need to be applied much more often. And generally when we talk about synthetic fertilizers, they're very water soluble, and you generally don't want to apply this when it goes through and you have a heavy rain. So as a result, what can happen is you can actually burn the plants or give them too much too quickly, and as a result, the plants can go through and die. So choosing the correct fertilizer is going to be extremely key when we go through and talk about, our experimentation in the scientific process, but when you want the plants to grow healthily. And going through and testing the soil is going to be key, so that way you know how much potassium and how much phosphorus is in the soil, so you can go through and account and apply the correct amount of fertilizer. Now the misconception here is students are going to think that plants are getting their energy from these nutrients in the soil. And that is not the case. Plants do not get their food and energy from the soil. They actually get it from the sun through a process called photosynthesis, which we will discuss more. But this overall process of photosynthesis is where we have autotrophs, which are plants, and they're going to produce high energy carbohydrates into sugars and starches. And what they're going to do is they're going to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're going to go through and combine that with water and sunlight. And when we go through this chemical process in the chloroplast, what's going to happen is we're going to get, in this case, glucose or carbohydrates, and then we're going to go through and get oxygen as a byproduct. So we have to keep in mind that this process of photosynthesis is really what's providing the energy, and the sun is providing the energy to the plants. But just like we go through and consume food and take vitamins and supplements that help us go through and allow our bones to grow, we get these vitamins either through our foods or we can take them synthetically, from a company. We have to understand that when we're putting down fertilizer, it's kind of like putting down vitamins to these plants. They're getting most of their energy from the sun, but we're also providing them with the vitamins and the nutrients that they need to enhance their growing. We'll look at photosynthesis more in detail when we get to our plants unit, but for right now we have to understand the energy is coming from the sun. So as a result, that we should have gotten two things out of this video. The first and most important thing that we want to get out of this video is how do we go through and apply the fertilizer effectively? When we do this in class and when we go through and look at our plants, specific types of plants that we'll be working with and the specific types of soil, we'll look at this in more detail. But what we want to do is test the soil, identify how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is in the soil, and then as a result, we're going to go out and purchase the correct fertilizer with the correct ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now this is going to depend upon the soil, but it also depends on the plant types. So this is why that research on our plants and our soil is going to be key when going through this experimentation process.